In today's video, we've got catastrophic roof leaks, we've got carpentry, we've got a bit of amateur roofing, and also the installation of an Electric Velux. So if you've got an extension where you're thinking of incorporating some of these skills, then stay tuned, because hopefully at the end of the video, you'll be able to do exactly what I did. At the start of 2023, we brutally attacked our kitchen, and after months of building works, we ended up with this mini extension and the old greenhouse roof on it to keep the rain out. Trouble is, the perspex was a bit knackered, it had lots of holes in it. Right, the greenhouse roof has finally failed. And every time it rained, we got lots of water coming down up here. This is not looking good. The good thing about the perspex is standing here, we realised just how much light it was letting into the room. So we thought, no, we're not going to put a solid roof in, we'll put a massive Velux in instead. And that's where it all started. But before I could get too excited about the shiny new Velux that had arrived, I had to sort out the roof. It was off with that cruddy greenhouse perspex, just look at all the water inside it. And then a nice, easy, if a little messy job grinding a channel in the Tyrolean render and removing a section of it to make way for the DIY LED soakers I'll be making. More on those in a minute. The prep was going well, just needed to trim the rafters off, and that's the tripod on the tower shaking, not the whole house. And the combination square should really have got out of my way. And I was cutting the rafters off to make way for a fascia, as this is what I've got everywhere else. Now, the Velux is heavy at over 60 kilograms and would need properly supporting, particularly given the roof pitch was going to be just 26 degrees. I imagine there were two ways of doing this, either having horizontal beams like this, or perhaps additional roof rafters. My structural engineer preferred this option with tripled up rafters and doubled up trimmers. And so I set about bolting together the rafters with sabre fixed timber connectors between each rafter for added strength. And I also had a bit of brickwork to make good after lifting them into place. By this point, that fascia was painted with the brilliant Bedeck Barn door paint and fixed into place. This was important as I wanted to screw the Marley 25mm eave vents to the fascia, so I had a reference point at the bottom of the roof to start with. Why? Because I wanted to temporarily fix some roof battens in place, working up from the bottom. What I'm doing here is trying to work out exactly where the batten that sits immediately below the Velux is going to be. And the instructions say it's got to be 100mm from the top of the tile to the top of the batten, which I think is that. I think we're done with that. Having the battens in place was also useful because they provided support for the rafters, which I could now measure and cut with my circular saw, ensuring a perfect 90-degree cut by using a rafter square as a guide for the saw, ready for the doubled up trimmers, which I initially bolted to the cut down rafters with structural screws before fixing to those tripled up rafters either side with joist hangers. I nailed the rafters down to the wall plate with my framing nailer. This wall plate install was a first in my DIY journey, the wall having been built by my builders. But building regs weren't impressed with my wall ties, so I had to put longer ones in. And then it was onto the top section, again using a batten as a brace to enable me to mark off and trim down the rafters, before installing the top double trimmer. Right, getting this exactly symmetrical has been a bit emotional, if I'm honest. Width's pretty much bang on, 1025, 1825, 1388, 1388, but couldn't get the diagonal to work. One little bit of advice, don't be banging in your hangers until you've got everything absolutely spot on, because I've had to dismantle them a couple of times, particularly when I had to get one of these rafters in and realised I couldn't do that after I fixed this into place. So that was a bit emotional as well. But anyway, I produced this little jig, and this has enabled me to double check that we're a perfect rectangle, which now, glad to say we are, after giving this a good clonk to get it into the right position. So we can finish off installing the rafters at the top now. But why is it so important to get this bang on? Well, Velux would say it's not, because if you look at the instructions, they give you a 20mm tolerance on the width, if not on the height. And the reason they do that is because they recommend you put the entire window system into the space you've created so that you can sort of shift it around before you screw it into position. Now this window is over 66 kilograms in weight, and I wasn't going to be lifting it in and out to get that right. So what I wanted to do was get it bang on first time so that I don't have to install the window more than once. And in case you're interested, these are the actual allowances I made. And did that strategy pay off? Well, just about. If you look up here, there is a very slight mismatch in the width of about 2 millimeters between the left and right hand sides in terms of consistency from top to bottom. Doesn't really have a material impact. I'll talk about that more at the end when I show you the window in operation. Let's get back to that E-vent system. And I thought I'd use this netting to try and stop flies getting through the vent and under the roof tiles. I put 100mm PIR between each rafter, cut grooves to let in those bolt ends, and then sealed all gaps with expanding foam. And if you ever join my Discord group, you'll realise the universal love we all have for this stuff. I had the undercloak boards to bed in, and then it was in with the rafter roll and support trays. Not sure how effective this will be to vent the space, but I wanted to do what I could to maximise ventilation. Breathable roof felt, usually use Tyvek, but this was easier to get hold of locally. Stuck down to the eave support tray with double-sided tape. Somebody tried to say recently I should have put the roof felt below that tray. I think you better check your roof, mate. In a minute I was going to get sick of going up and down that ladder and construct the tower, which I hadn't been bothered to do. And here we've got those last few bits of 100mm PIR going in. I've got a nice overlap of the roofing felt right up to the next batten under here. I've decided at this point where to go with a change of pitch flashing, which some people say you need. It was time to overlap and staple down and trim off the roof felt as per the brilliantly clear instructions, and then snap together the insulation collar, which used to be an optional extra but I think now comes with the flashing kit. And this, the most satisfying part of the project so far, squeezing that insulation collar into position. It's a big milestone this, and you can allow yourself a bit of a celebration. Don't let any builders ever try and convince you not to have this. It's a very important part of eliminating cold bridging. But I just want to show you what I've done over here in the corner. These are the lead soakers that I've made. I had to look at a blog I wrote about 7 or 8 years ago to work out how to do this. And the idea of these is they'll be rendered in, and any rain that cascades down the roof can't get between the roof and the wall. And I know only too well just how damaging that can be after that greenhouse roof I had here recently with the rain we've had got completely inundated in the kitchen. And what we're doing at the bottom with these clay interlocking tiles, which I've never used before, cement interlocking tiles, is I've got another one underneath which basically stretches all the way below. We've got a big headlamp here, about 140 millimeters. So that sits below the last tile, so any rain that does get down gets diverted out and into the gutter. I thought of taking this corner bit off here of the render, but I didn't think I needed to, and actually as it's turned out I didn't, because that sits really nicely in there. If you ever buy a roll of lead, keep it inside, then you won't get this happening to it. I was a bit worried about my overlap here, it wasn't really long enough, so what I've done is I've cut another half tile off at that end to shift the whole thing over, so we've got a decent situation now at both sides of the roof. But why, you might be asking, am I going with these Marley concrete interlocking roof tiles when the rest of my roof has these rather nice old Rosemaries? Well, there's a very good reason for that. You heard me say earlier on that the roof pitch is only 26 degrees on this extension. We couldn't do anything about that. And these Rosemaries will not go down to 26 degrees, they won't be waterproof. Whereas these Marley Edgemere, which I've got, go down to a minimum pitch of 17.5 degrees. And I've increased the protection on these tiles because I've gone with a headlamp. I don't think the headlamp needs to be anything like this, but I've gone with a massive headlamp of, I think it's about 145 mil. And the reason I've done that is because I want these tiles to, as much as possible, match what we've got on the roof above. And hopefully you'll agree, I haven't done a bad job of that. And the other point to make here that goes back to that point I was just making about the overlap. They do tile and a halves in the Marley, but the guys who sold me these were really stingy. They wouldn't give me any tile and a halves because they said the quantity I needed for this roof wasn't high enough. But in actual fact, I didn't need them in the end. So a bit of careful spacing and cutting at one end like I've done here sorts your problem out without the need for tile and a halves. But back to the window, ironically, the trickiest part is getting it out of the frame, not helped in this situation by one of the locking lugs having jammed in transit, or I don't know, being in the wrong place. But eventually I managed to get the mechanism to open, and with the two parts separated, I could screw the brackets into the frame and then lift it into the insulation collar, and from this point on it just becomes a really fun DIY equivalent of Lego. I then got the underfelt collar out and started fitting that round the window. And then the rain came back in, which I have to say plagued me throughout this install. Breaking the clouds and a few more tiles down, and I decided to cement in the verges as I progressed up the roof, as it's easier to lay tiles onto the cemented verge rather than trying to trowel it in later on. That's alright, it. Installing this tray that's designed to deflect any water that gets under the tiles away from the window is a bit tricky and seems a bit counterintuitive. I don't like the idea of cutting into my underfelt. It's kind of my big issue with it, really. But anyway, here goes. You do, however, get these rubber strips to reseal the area that you've cut. Action! And with a couple more roof battens in place, I could fit the top tray. Gotta say, cutting these concrete tiles leaves voids underneath, so I did have to improvise with packers and screw them down so that they sat neatly how I wanted them to. But with the Velux now installed, I was on a roll. A lot of people have asked me what happens when the window is open and it rains. Well, Velux have thought of that. There's a rain sensor that automatically closes it. But the wires were trailing inside the window, so I tidied them up and refitted that top weather guard or whatever it's called. Roofing is one of my favourite DIY jobs, but I completely take my hat off to the way roofers neatly cement in the verges. Here I am with a sponge trying to tidy mine up. There's always a bit of improvisation on jobs like this, and I had to put a wooden lath underneath this section so that the tiles sit straight across the roof. And finally, the incredibly satisfying job of tying in the new tiles with the rosemaries above. And I decided that what with that large overlap and the underfelt beneath, I didn't need the added protection of a change of pitch flashing. I was getting there. Next it was time to render in those lead soakaways, which I used a mix of 4 parts builder's sand to 1 part cement for, with a splosh of waterproof admix to weatherproof but also to act as a plasticizer. This masking tape also worked really well at keeping cement off the tiles and leaving me with a nice clean edge. And with a little help from DIYte, we hauled that incredibly heavy window into position, and yay, it was fitted! So I thought this roof was now looking pretty cosy, but building regs made me put another 50mm of insulation below the rafters, and with that insulation collar and the expanding foam adhesive behind the plasterboard, you can clearly see how well insulated these reveals now are. Unfortunately, Sparks couldn't remember where the feed from the switched spur went, so we had to channel a new feed down the wall, but nothing a bit of Tetrion filler couldn't sort out. And speaking of electrics, this is where this window really comes into its own. The wireless switch opens and closes it, as you can also do through the app. And as I said earlier, that tiny mismatch in the opening hasn't affected its operation. And I've also added Velux Active so the window opens and closes to reduce humidity, CO2, and generally to keep it regularly aired. And this kind of complements the single room heat recovery fan I've installed in the utility. There are a couple of videos on this on my channel. And 1 year on, it's been completely watertight, as you'd have hoped, and is functioning well, although I still haven't got round to painting that rendering over the soakers. Just as well we've got the waterproof admix. And this cast iron guttering I bought could do with a bit of adjustment. The verges could do with a bit of a scrub, but the big frustration is I was let down by the renderer. He's promised me I'm the first job in his diary when the weather's warm enough. So that's it for today. I really hope you found that video useful. Let me know what you think in the comments section below. And as usual, details of everything I've used, talked about, referred to in today's video will be in the description below the video. So if you're new to my channel, it would mean so much to me to have you on board. You can subscribe by clicking on the link here, and don't forget to click the bell notification icon so you get notified of all my future uploads. Thanks again, and I'll see you next week.